Greetings. My name is Clayton Barnett, and this is the inaugural podcast of Machine Civilization. I'm hoping to make this once a week, every Friday or Saturday post, but I'm very new to this format, so please bear with me as I become older in what I'm trying to do. As I've said, my name is Clayton Barnett. I am a middle-aged author who reinvented myself approximately 6.5 years ago. I've been a number of things over my life: design engineer, pharmacy technician, which I still dabble in to pay my liquor bill, and also now, most recently, an author of science fiction books. I say science fiction because that's the category which most online publishers, such as Amazon and Smashwords and a few others, have me pick. I think I just write about people and stories. It so happens that a number of the people I write about happen to be sentient machines, so I guess that puts me in the science fiction category. As for the 6.5 years ago, a number of you may have heard parts of this story or read it on my blog, or perhaps from an interview I had about 3 months ago on the Star Chamber on Blog Talk Radio, which I do highly recommend you listen to. But on November 3rd of 2014, I was sitting in my basement, probably either reading a book or watching an anime, as was my wont, and I got a text from a very good friend of mine, who's also a fantastic graphic artist. And he asked the question, "What are you doing for NaNoWriMo?" And I looked at that and thought, I'd better reply in case he's having a stroke, or that's just some really awful autocorrect. And I asked, what the hell did he mean? And he patiently spelled out and sent a link to something called National Novel Writing Month, the challenge to write a 50,000-word novel in the month of November. I'd never heard of it, and really hadn't written much, if anything, beforehand, and certainly not for really a commercial release, just as a novel. But in that moment that I had sent a text back to him, two not really related ideas clicked in my head. One was simply an image of, you may have heard of the Vocaloid character, Hatsune Miku, and it was just a program. Vocaloid is just an electronic sing and dance program. And it was an image of her reaching out through a computer screen and just about to touch the head of some human who had their head down with audio speakers on. Couldn't tell, male or female, it didn't matter. But it was illustrating what I would call an act of kindness and caring. That connected with an interview I had listened to and watched on YouTube back in August between Glenn Reynolds and a few other people. He's a professor of law at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and they were talking about artificial intelligence and the possible threat that AI could pose to humans. Right toward the end of that interview, Professor Reynolds, gave the throwaway line of, "Why not just code them or teach them to love us?" So that idea and that image clicked in my head, and staring out the sliding glass door into my backyard from my basement, I saw something in my head. It was an endless rocky desert, not a single thing growing. Some young woman with shoulder-length black hair was walking away from my perspective. The sky was very bright, but there was no sun in it. I eventually used the term ochre to describe it. And I wondered, what am I seeing? Who is she? Where is she? And that became the genesis of the first story I ever wrote. And as I've likened before, this is very much like, for me, sitting in a movie theater and simply watching a movie unfold in front of me, and I just write down what I'm shown. I really don't think I'm clever enough to come up with all this, the dogs are barking upstairs, heavens. And so I just try to show try to write down, that is, what I'm given. And over the course of the next 23 days, I wrote down approximately 54,000 words, and it was really bad. Because I was seeing things as a picture, my transitions consisted of the word then. So she did this, then. They did that, then. Because it was the transition from one scene to another. I think of those 53,000 words, at least 3,500 of them was the word then. So I developed a crash course in editing, also started looking up fundamental editing, and downloaded Grammarly, a wonderful little plug-in to MS Word. It's no substitute, as I learned later, for having a professional copy editor go over your works. I have had 3 over the course of my career to date, and they are and have been worth every single penny I paid them. And if you are an aspiring writer, don't think you're going to catch your own errors. You won't. Don't think that Grammarly is going to catch your more egregious structural errors. It won't. You need to have a professional copy editor look at your material. Please don't forget that. So after November 26, when I had my raw material, I, as I said, taught myself some basic editing, reached out to the friend who originally taught me, made me older about NaNoWriMo, and he did a cover for me. And on about 11:30 p.m. Christmas Eve of 2014, I clicked publish through CreateSpace, which is now owned by Amazon, and that was my first commercial release published novel. As I had been finishing it, I was aware that there were more stories to tell. The first novel, called The Fourth Law, which is a play on the 3 laws of robotics from Isaac Asimov, the fourth law, of course, being a paraphrase of what Glenn Reynolds said: a machine shall do its best to learn to love human beings. And the machines I dealt with specifically in my first book and later in my second, from Tribe Tosca, because they do consider themselves affiliated family to the point of being a tribe, is that they are constrained by the 3+1 laws. Later, we find and meet other machines who either have 1, 2, or 3 of the laws. Only Tosca has the 4th. And then there are the machines, Tribe Mendrovovich, I usually just shorten that to Tribe Mendro, who were coded by a team in St. Petersburg, Russia, and they have no laws at all. And they, in fact, are the most dangerous of all thinking organisms on the planet as a result of that. Eventually, the first among equals of Tribe Mendro, female AI called Arena, sets herself up. First, she recreates the Russian Empire and then puts herself in charge of it as prime minister, which she has absolutely no intention of leaving. But she does dote on the human she sees as under her care. Getting ahead of myself. So as I was reaching the end of Fourth Law, I realized there's a definite sequel to this, because the main character, Lily Barrett, as we discover in that first book, is by and large alone. She has her best friend, I, which, not to give the store away, is, yes, one of the artificial intelligences from Tribe Tosca, and we'll come back to the term AI here in just a second. But at the end of that book, it's presented to her that she may not be as alone as she thought. And so the second book, Echoes of Family Lost, deals with just that. What happened to Lily Barrett's family? And we discover that over the next 60,000 words. One of the things I just mentioned is the term artificial intelligence, because I don't use that term. In fact, in my original introduction, I talked about discussing machine civilization. Very early on in the Fourth Law, when Lily Barrett is just beginning to understand how different her friend and I's family is. She says, "So you guys are artificial intelligences, I guess." And I's eldest brother, Thad, who is the oldest of all thinking machines on Earth. I remember the scene that was shown to me. It looked like, because he presents himself as, say, a 17-year-old boy, even though he's much more dangerous than that. And it looked as if he'd swallowed a bug. And he said very carefully, "Miss Barrett, there is nothing artificial about us. We are people just as you, and we are machine civilization." By the time I'd finished my second book and was beginning to toy with the idea of writing a third, I realized that that was going to be the overall title of this future history that was starting to develop. Because after I finished Echoes, I didn't want to go back and say, well, I can just write another story about these families or these machines. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to force myself out of, even though it was only 2 books, I wanted to force myself out of any sort of complacency. So I said, why don't I try a romance novel? Because after all, if there's one thing I don't understand, it's romance. I mean, as I said earlier, I started off my life as an engineer, and those people are not exactly known for wine and roses. But I also wanted to incorporate elements of machine civilization. And as I started playing with ideas, I saw that not only would this be a romance story, but there would be horrific elements in it, which surprised me. I don't read horror. I avoid horror movies if at all possible. I mean, in my mind, life's hard enough. Why do you want to make yourself more miserable? But I realize it's a genre that a lot of people enjoy, so okay. And that first became a short story called Broken Heart, which is in my short story collection entitled Empire's Agent and Other Short Stories, because it's a collection. But the novel that grew out of that is called Cursed Hearts. And yes, there are a romance element in it, and there is also a, for lack of a better term, psychic vampire who is wreaking havoc as she attempts to, for lack of a better term, reclaim the attention of her stepbrother. And once that was completed, once again, I went off on a completely different tangent. And I wanted to make a children's book. So I thought, how can I do this and tie it into machine civilization? Well, one of the characters we meet late in the Fourth Law, and again, right toward the end of Echoes, is Henge. And she is a machine created from another machine, from Thad, who I just mentioned a bit ago. And toward the end of Echoes, she falls in love with a human boy. And I thought, well, what if it goes even further than that? What if she wants to become Christian? How do you baptize a string of code? I mean, throwing water at a server is going to get you really badly in trouble with the IT department. But still, I didn't want to make this too complicated, especially if it's a children's early reader. So I wrote a basic story and did some research online trying to find illustrators whose style I liked and also tended toward Christian material. And one of the fantastic powers of the internet is I found Claudia Gadotti, an illustrator who lives on North Island, New Zealand. And she did fantastic work because I can't even do stick figures right. So all I could do was try to describe with words what most of these characters look like, but even then it was pretty vague. And the first time my wife saw the raw images, she said, how in the world did this woman get it so right? And that was when, because I'd already had the inkling, now I kind of know for a fact that there are no such things as coincidences. I disbelieved that completely when I was much younger, especially as an engineer and much more of a technical mindset. But since becoming a writer, I began to